this summer we're a little more laid back. Well, good morning. You know, there's kind of a little quirk I have. My family is very embarrassed by it, but I'm actually quite a bargain hunter. Well, I grew up in Oakville. People in Oakville that have garage sales would often have things that are quite valuable because there's a lot of money in Oakville. And so I used to garage sale there and would find rare and precious things. And I brought this habit to Peterborough. Now, I found the quality of garage sales in Peterborough a little lower than that in Oakville. A lot of junk sales. But someone came up with the brilliant idea of creating a store that is like a big perpetual garage sale called Value Village, right? And there's another one in the north end called Talese. 50 years ago, it was inconceivable that you could actually have a retail business that did nothing but took donations of stuff and then sold it to people. Because 50 years ago, a lot of those people lived back there had lived through the Great Depression, and you did not get rid of your stuff. You know, you shared it, you made it work, all those kind of things. But in a consumer society, we turn stuff over. And it is interesting, the different things people have purchased and then donated, and then they're attempting to sell them again. All right, was in a few weeks ago, I took a picture of this one. It says deer season begins, and it's got a deer shooting a man on an outhouse. Why anyone would have paid money for this initially is beyond me. There's another one here. There's two. One, a ball of string. I kid you not, it was about this big. I was thinking, you know, if you wanted a kite to go really high, you know, that ball of string might be. And the second was a rack showing all these awful colored suit jackets lined up. And I thought that was odd. And then we can go on. This is an Easter Island Kleenex box holder that you can pull the Kleenex out of his nose. Isn't that amazing? I actually almost bought this. This one it's got, it says, "Peace, be still," and Jesus looks like he's in a sprint. You know? No, go back to that one. I was trying to figure out why, you know, this contradictory and why this, you know, kind of thing. And it reminded me in football when we used to make the Hail Mary pass. Remember, you know, just in the end zone, the Hey Mom pass. And yes, that was the next one. The next one, I took a picture of this one. And the lady beside me, you can see she's not amused. But this one just says home, it's a mirror, and there's hangers and all that kind of stuff. And then there's this one. It says, "Perhaps they are not stars in the sky, but rather openings where our loved ones shine down and let us know they are happy." So the idea of the stars of the sky are there to let us know that our in-laws or our outlaws or our former friends and all the people who have passed on are okay, right? And we'd like to believe that. And it's interesting, statistics show that most people, if you ask them questions like, do you believe in an afterlife? Most people do. And then if you ask them, you'll say, you know, are you going to be in the good part of the afterlife? Yeah, most people do. In fact, the number of people that you ask and say, do you believe in a hell? Would, you know, I think it's probably 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 people actually believe in a literal hell. But if you ask them if they're going to it, it's like a percentage of 1% of people actually think they're going to this bad place. And so I thought perhaps it's a good idea for us to consult some experts and bring a little clarity into what we understand the afterlife. Last week we talked about what the Bible says and what Jesus talked about as the afterlife, and what Jews and Christians believed, that this life isn't all there is. In fact, this life is a precursor to our actual lives, which will be lived in eternity. That life is in many ways a test, and life is an opportunity, and that you have one life. And it's interesting because what we believe about eternity determines how we live today. And I really believe that. If you know that each day is a gift, you tend to live a little differently, right? And often when a tragedy befalls me or someone close to, I am drawn back into the light of the idea that life is temporary, I won't be around forever, and that each day is a gift, and we don't know how long we're going to be here. And some of you have lost people and been through that tragedy. And there's very little that we come through those things without, we're deeply hurt and we're deeply wounded. One of the positive aspects of understanding that is to go, okay, life is short, let's make the most of it. How can I take today and make it meaningful? And we would like to believe that. And so what we tend to believe about eternity determines how we live today. And so we talked about that last week. This week I want to talk about something that Jesus spoke about more than anybody else. We tend to think of Jesus as a nice teacher, a prophet, the Son of God, very positive, telling everybody to get along. But Jesus also talked about a place called hell. And I'm going to teach a little bit about what he taught and talk a little bit about it, and then answer the question, does there really need to be such a place? Excuse me. And if there is such a place, why would God allow it to exist? And that's a good question. How does a good, loving God allow such a place to exist? And why does it exist? And if it exists, what's it like? And so I'm going to talk about that today. This is not a message I enjoy giving. It's probably not a message you enjoy hearing, okay? But it's important to understand a little bit of why we do what we do and what we believe in order to understand how great God's love, power, and grace is. Because the beautiful thing, as we were singing a few minutes ago, is there's this horrible situation we have in life. We all pass away, we all suffer loss, we all suffer tragedy. But there is a God, a good God, a loving God, a grace-filled God, who offers for us new life in Christ and new life for eternity. And so we're going to talk about that. One of the things Jesus said, which scared me particularly when I was younger, is enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and few find it. So I asked this question. I'm just going to go through a few things here, and I want to leave some time for Q&A because I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and comments afterwards and things like that. First of all, I do want to let you know, if you enjoy the fact that Jesus believed there was a hell and you're actually feeling good about it and you're going, I know some people should go there, like your ex-boyfriend or, those kind of things. I want you to know this isn't something that should make you happy, okay? Hell should bring a somber reality of the existence of evil and good to our minds. The second thing is, and I'll allude to this a little bit later, but we tend to live in a world right now where we are very naive. And by naive, I mean in the 1950s and 60s, countries, Russia and the United States, built up these huge nuclear arsenals and pointed them at each other. And the downside to that is within reach of a button, there is a power in this world to completely annihilate the whole planet permanently. That's a horrible thing. The good part of it, though, is it's created this tension or this peace in our world where most people in Western society have never been at war, never been in a battle, never been in the reality that 99.9% of people in history have lived through. So we tend to think right here and now that the good lives we enjoy right now are the norm, when in reality they are the rare exception. You wonder if you ever open up your newspaper and you see some of the silly things that they write about, about what politicians say or about people that are doing this or doing that, and the world looks really silly, but in reality, our reaction to our Western society reality should be gratitude. Because if we have time to argue about all these silly things, then we're probably doing pretty good. You know what I mean? We're not arguing about a 50% child mortality rate. We're not talking about, a viral plague that spreads through and wipes out 90% of our population as they did in the Middle Ages. We're not talking about our warring neighbors who, come regularly and kill all our young men and drag all our young women off into slavery. We're not talking about those things, but in reality history is full of those things. And because of that, we tend to have an unrealistic view of evil. We tend to have a naive view of evil. We tend to think that there are no evil people, there are just misunderstood people. We tend to think that we aren't evil, we're basically good, and God would be lucky to have us go to heaven. And one thing, I'm a student of history, I've learned is to look back in history and see the horrible things people have done to each other and not think of myself as a possible victim, but think of myself as a perpetrator. Because in reality, if I lived in those worlds, there's better odds that I would have been just as awful as the people of that day and time, and you would too. To think back in history and to think all the awful things people have done to each other, and to think that somehow you're virtuous and there's no way you would have done it, you would have been the exception, you're probably 99% wrong. And so we have to understand this, that evil is horrible. This is why we understand how great God's grace is that we can someday stand before him. So why does there need to be hell? The first reason is a loving God gives a choice. I'm going to talk in a minute about why we live forever, because people do. We're made in the image of God. It is impossible to kill you. And by kill you, I mean eliminate you completely. You were made in the image of God. You are an eternal being. Now here's the thing. Is God going to make you serve him? Is he going to take away your will in order to have you serve him? Well, if God was a tyrant, that's what he would do. That's what tyrants do. They control, right? God's not a tyrant. God is love. It's not one of his attributes. It actually is who he is. Love always comes with a choice. I love my wife, and she stays with me. If I were to take my wife, lock her in a room, feed her pizza under the door, never let her out and all that, I would not be a husband, I would be a kidnapper, okay? The same goes for God. He will not make you love him. He won't, because love always gives a choice. And so even in the Garden of Eden, with all the bliss and everything, in the middle there was a tree where people could decide to walk away from God and choose evil. And unfortunately for us, back at the beginning of humanity, someone made that choice. And ever since then, sin has ruled the human race. Ever since then, we have lived in fear and evil, and horrible things happen in our lives. Tragedy will befall us all. It is the reality of being a human being. And because of that, God had to do something that we could never do in our own strength. And so I'm talking about that in a minute. But a loving God always gives a choice. If you love somebody, you don't make them love you back. You interact with them and you offer your love, but it has to be accepted and reciprocated. Jesus' last command to his followers was love one another. It is the only command that an individual can't fulfill. It is a command that it takes two of us to make work. So if I love you the way Jesus loved you, and you love me the way Jesus loved me, then you are fulfilling the great command that Jesus said, love one another. So a loving God gives a choice. Second reason, there has to be an alternative to living with God. If I had to define hell, hell is this. It's a place where there is no God. God's influence is gone. God's presence is gone. You see, a lot of people say, well, why can't there be a place where people enjoy and have virtue and love and mercy and grace and all those kind of things? Because those things cannot exist outside the character of God. He's the source of all of them. Just as if I were to take these wires and sever them, there's no way that those microphones are going to work to reach those speakers unless they have Bluetooth. Sorry, I digress. But there's no way they're going to work. It's the same with God. When we choose in our eternity, when we choose in this life to say, no thank you, God, no thank you, God. C.S. Lewis talks about this. The idea of hell is the idea that we go through life saying, God, go away, I don't want you. And then we get into the afterlife, and God says, your will be done. You don't want me? I'm not going to make you want me. Your will be done. And so there has to be a choice. There has to be a place where God doesn't influence. Third reason. Souls are eternal. I talked about this a little bit before, but you are made in the image of God. You will never die. You may physically die, but there will come a day where this body you have and your soul will be reunited and you'll stand before God. Some of us may be going, I don't necessarily want that to happen because I don't like my body very much, or I don't like the way I look, or whatever. I think there shall be some improvements and renovations done, but we will still recognize each other. At least I'm hoping for some improvements and renovations. I don't know if you are too. But we are eternal beings. You cannot be killed. Never completely. And when the Bible talks about the word death, death actually doesn't mean finality. Death means separation. The idea of death is a separation from God. Death is not a final act. Death is a reality of living outside the presence of God. So souls are eternal. Next reason, the reality of evil and a need for justice. You cannot have a holy God without having a just God. And here's a really interesting thing, because I hear people say this, and sometimes a new atheist or university professor I had, or somebody will get up and say, a loving God, there's no way he would judge people. There's no way he would do that. I would never believe in a loving God who would actually send people to hell. I never believe in all that. But often those people, and I don't know if you pick up on this too, but are often the most judgmental people when their own rights are violated. So if someone cuts them off or rips them off or does something with them, they're the first ones to say, oh no, that has to be made right. I demand justice. We really demand justice when our own rights are violated. Yet we don't believe that there is a good God over this whole world who is just, because we don't want there to be, right? And here's the reality is, when I look at God and say, I'm not going to believe in you because you will judge me someday, well, think about that. Think about that. I'm actually taking his job from them, okay? Here's the thing. If there is a good God, a gracious God, an all-powerful God, a creator, if everything belongs to him, doesn't he have the right to do what he wants to do with it? And let's maybe hope that his character and his goodness and his wisdom are better than our own perceptions. Many people will say, there's why doesn't God just make it go away? Why doesn't God do this? But you don't actually believe that. If we see somebody that is, when we say in the news, there's someone that kills people or hurts children or, brings about war, this world's very quick to demand justice. That person should be locked up and the key thrown away. That person should receive capital punishment. That person should have to pay it back. That person should have to do that. We actually believe in justice. We just don't believe it when it actually comes to us. The standard I impose on you for my selfish gain is way higher than the standard I would put on myself. It really is. And when I blow it and I do things, I'm very quick to make excuses for myself, and you are too. I'm very quick to talk myself out of it, and you are too. I'm very quick to say, but there's an exception. And here's the interesting thing in this world. We sometimes teach people, there's no bad people, just misunderstood people. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie where this happens, but it's all the time through it. You get somebody who's doing all horrible things, and then they find out when he was a little child, his mother abandoned him, and someone tells that story to him, and then he cries, and then he comes and he's part of the big happy family and stuff like that. And that's wonderful. It is good that we take people's experiences into account. But here's the thing. Your past doesn't have to control your present. Your past doesn't have to control your present. Just because you were abused doesn't mean you are automatically going to be an abuser. In fact, here's a statistical, historical reality. If abused people were abusers, we would all be abusers. Historically, it would just happen over time where every single person, here's the reality, a majority of people who have been abused don't abuse. Did you know that? We always think that people that, abuse other people, well, they were abused, and that's the reason they're doing it. I'm not talking about mental illness. There's kind of exceptions here where people's brains aren't working and things like that. But this reality that, that people are trying to create, that there are no bad people, they're just misunderstood people, sometimes perfectly people raised in good circumstances with good parents and good situations, and that turn into Charles Manson. Sometimes they do. There are evil people in the world. And the reality is what we do in life echoes in eternity. It makes a difference. Evil and justice are part of the universe. The next thing is God will eradicate evil and death. Hell has a purpose. And the purpose is that someday the things that break our hearts will come to an end. Do you know that? Death is finite. There will come a day where the idea of death, the whole concept, death will cease. Someday, the reality of broken hearts shall cease. Someday, the reality of pain shall cease. All these kind of things. Heaven is a promise that the things in this life that break our hearts and wreck us are finite and will come to cease. And hell is a place where those things will be banished. The Bible promises that there will come a day when things like death, things like sickness, things like pain will get thrown into a place called hell, and they'll have no hold over you. You imagine that, being in a place where you'll live forever and experience no pain or death or illness. I can tell you, I got a cold this week. Sounds like a good gig to me. And I'm going to talk about that next week when we talk about heaven. All right? 2 other reasons quickly. First, hell exists to deal righteously with Satan. The devil who deceived him was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur. The beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They'll be tormented day and night forever and ever. The devil, who is a eternal being as well, he has to go somewhere, and hell was designed for him. And then hell exists for God to deal righteously with people who are unbelievers. He will punish those who do not know God and not obey the gospel of our Lord, and they'll be punished with everlasting destruction, shut out from the presence of the Lord. 2 Thessalonians 1:8. So, I'm going to address just a couple of the objections to hell, and then I'm going to talk about what hell is. So, here's a few objections that people have to hell. The first one is this: there's no afterlife. The world is all there is. People that tend to believe this kind of thinking started actually about 400 or 500 years ago in the Enlightenment, and a lot of people began to teach that everything could be answered by science and reason and those kind of things, and it became quite a powerful idea among the intellectuals, and so people started to teach that there was no afterlife, and there's still many people that teach that that this life is all there is. Okay, and you can choose to believe that. But I have questions around a couple of things. One is if there is no God and there is no afterlife and this life is all there is, why do we have such a drive for purpose? Why do we have such a drive for meaning? If we are just animals, if we're just put in this world and we haven't got the stamp of an eternal God on us and things, then what motivates us to make anything of this life? You'll say, well, just for noble reasons. Well, what is nobility? We look at this life and we go, why? Why am I here? Where am I from? Where am I going? How do I determine good and evil? All these questions that are very much a part of our everyday life are impossible to answer if this world is all there is. And if you are just a created being, a natural consequence of science. We talk, this is a very big view that Stephen Hawking had, and there's a quote where he says that we are just computers, broken down computers, he said, and when the computers are gone, then you're gone. I don't imagine, this is a bad joke, but, Stephen Hawking, a minute after he died, went, oh, no, and, come on, that was pretty good. You standing before God. Anyways, so the belief that there's no afterlife, you can choose to believe this, but, I would say that leaves many questions unanswered and leaves the complexity of life and the fact that we seem to be such spiritual beings empty. And I can talk at length about this more, but second, many people believe it makes God evil and uncivilized. How could a loving God allow the existence of a hell? How could a loving God allow the existence of the idea of punishment? How could a loving God allow this world to, a whole bunch of people. But I counter with this. What did God, in his loving conscience, do to fix this problem? Well, he sent his son to die for us. And what more could God have done? We are given a free gift, our salvation. It is a gift. We can't earn it. And if you think you're going to heaven because you do more good things than bad, you're kind of missing the boat. Because Jesus didn't come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people alive. And when he makes you alive and when you become a follower of Christ, it's a free gift. He gives it to you. This is why Christians should be, and mostly are, irrationally happy. Because, here I go. I've got all this stuff that I could worry about, and God says, here's my gift, my son. And if I receive him, I stand before God's spot. He sees me and he sees Jesus. What more could he have done? If God is love and he has to give choice, what more could he have done? What love letter could he have written that doesn't get addressed in the presence of Jesus Christ? And the fact that there's a hell, 99.9% of people in history knew or have known that there had to be an answer to evil in this world. We just tend to be isolated from it. I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and someone was talking about Passchendaele. Passchendaele was a battle that happened in 1917. A lot of Canadians involved with it. There was a battle that happened on the Western Front when England and its colonies, including a lot of Canadians, attempted an assault on a German high position on the Western Front. And that year, they had double the rainfall in that month that they were used to. And they were in Belgium, where there was traditionally a dike system which kind of managed water out of the way. And those dikes had all been exploded and things had been flooded. And quite literally, men were walking on boards on the mud into machine gun fire to attempt to attack this place. And if you fell off into the mud, your feet got trapped. And if they didn't get you out right away, well, it was really shallow and it didn't take long, it took seconds, then you were stuck there. And thousands of men died over 4 days while the mud sucked them down. So much so that there were troops who out of mercy killed some of their best friends as they sank into the mud. You would never have a hard time convincing someone that was at Passchendaele that there's not a hell, because they saw it. You would never question the American soldiers who liberated Auschwitz whether there was a hell, because they saw it. The naivety that which we look at this world and fail to see the evil of it causes us to sugarcoat things and to look lightly in this world. It doesn't make God evil and uncivilized. It makes God God. That's something to address that level of evil is happening and will happen. History cries of people who have lost their lives and lived in hellish circumstances. Next one. The distributors. I call this the people who want everybody to get some Smarties. Well, Jesus died for everybody, so everybody's going to go to heaven. Everybody's going to go to heaven. God paid the price, so everybody's going to heaven. And first of all, this is unscriptural because it actually teaches that we actually have to own our lives and come to Christ and offer our lives to God and come serve Him. That's one aspect of it. But distributors are the people in our society that go, everybody needs some, and they're going, oh, where's little Adolf, little Joseph, little Mussolini? Okay, quit poking the cats in the eyes with a stick and come have your crackers and soup, Like we want to bring everybody under this banner. And everybody, it's kind of the mothering, aspect of us where we don't want anything bad to happen to anybody. The reality is, though, it doesn't match up to this world. There are evil people. There are people who choose not to follow God. There are people that are influenced by evil. And then the last objection is probably the most famous. I don't want there to be a hell, therefore it must not exist. You'd be surprised how many people believe this. I don't want it to be there. I refuse to believe God would do this. I refuse to believe that this exists. Yet Jesus, who was the most loving, peace-loving, greatest teacher of all history, talked about hell more than anybody else. He talked about it because he was good, and he was right, and he did love people. Why is this guy who's walking around, who's taking the people everybody else cast off, prostitutes, tax collectors, sinners, zealots, women and children, all marginalized by their society, and Jesus stood up for them, and he healed them, and he talked to them, and he treated them like people, and he elevated them, and he interacted with them. Why would this man talk about hell? Because he saw the hell in the lives of these people who were being horribly oppressed by an unfair world. Jesus understood because he did nothing but lift people out of it. I'd like there not to be a hell. I'd like there not to be child slavery. I'd like there not to be, sex slaves in the world. I'd like there not to be wars. I would like there not to be global warming. I would like there not to be all these kind of things. I can live in denial, about all kinds of things. I would like to think, that everybody listens to everything I say and does what I say. I'd like to believe that I actually teach what I believe all the time. There's all things I wish were true that aren't necessarily true, right? Wishful thinking doesn't make it go away, right? So the question is, okay, if I stop denying it, if I stop sticking my thumb in my ears and going, no, I'm not listening, what is my response to this? Well, I'm going to read a short passage, and then I'll take some questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. First of all, I want you to know, if you're wrestling with this, I want you to hear me out, and I'd like you to take your Bibles and read about it. I have spent this week blowing my mind out reading about this and reading through Scripture and things like I've read Dante's Inferno. Anybody ever heard of Dante's Inferno? He's an Italian man, actually sit down, wrote this whole big long book about hell and heaven and his hell, and he talks about the 7 levels and all these kind of things. Really interesting chap. I read Erickson's theology on this, all those kind of things, questions, answers, and all that. So if you have a question, today's probably your day, because probably tomorrow I'll forget it all. But when we talk about these kind of things, I know you have some questions, and there's a process you'll go through. And here's a process. And the question you have to ask is my God big enough, good enough, gracious enough, powerful enough that I can entrust my eternity with him? Because you're going to, whether you want to or not, but can you let that go? Can you say, okay, this place exists because God says it does, Jesus does. Can I trust this God that I'm serving with this reality? And go, how then shall I live? Okay? Because if God isn't what he says he is, and he's not what he claims to be, and if our own reality is what we make it of God, it's not God you're serving, it's your idea of God. And as much as I would like that to be true, the world doesn't work that way. Jesus told the story from Luke 16. It said, there was a rich man who dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At the gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, now it would be good to have the big screen. Remember when we got the big screens and people said it's too big? Well, this week you can complain because it's too small if you like, either way. But it's nice and bright, isn't it? Just because of our summer and our setup crew and stuff, we made it a little easier this week on everybody. But Abraham replied, Son, remember in your lifetime you received good things and Lazarus received bad things. So now he's comforted here and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place. So those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor anyone cross over there to us. He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers, and let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets, let them listen to him. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they'll repent. And he said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they'll not be convinced, even as someone else rises from the dead. This rich man, Lazarus, they talk about purple and linen. What Jesus was teaching and how his hearers would have heard this is this guy was Kardashian rich, okay? First of all, linen, one piece of linen would be a year's wages to the people he was talking to. And then purple, there were rare dyes to which you could dye something purple. It was considered the color of royalty in those days. And so someone was wearing something purple, if you're wearing purple today, people would have thought you were king or queen because it was so hard to dye clothes that way. The second thing is they had in that culture, rich people, they were so affluent that they actually used to clean off their hands and their faces after they didn't have napkins. So what they used to do is they'd take a fresh loaf of bread, they would cut it, and they would rub the bread over their face and over their hands to clear their hands, and some of the crumbs would fall under the table. The servants used to sweep those crumbs up, and then they would cast them outside with the dogs to give the dogs a treat. This poor man Lazarus, who was lying in pain and suffering, was begging for those crumbs to come to him. And so Jesus talks about the afterlife. He talks about this person who lived an entire self-indulgent life, and he talks about this other person who's been oppressed and hurt and all those things. And for whatever reason, we believed in God. And the afterlife looks really different. 4 things that stood out. First one is a rich man was fully conscious and aware. Lazarus knew where he was and who he was. The second thing, the rich man's eternal destiny was irrevocably fixed, which means he said to Abraham, let me out of here, or let me somebody do something. And Abraham said, there's a chasm. What you've done has decided who you are or where you're going to be. The rich man also knew his suffering was just. He didn't object. He didn't say to God, I shouldn't be here. And then the rich man begged and pleaded for someone to help his brothers know Jesus. If hell can produce anything good, one of the things it should produce in a believer of Jesus Christ is a serious understanding of this world needing God, and a willingness to sacrifice and lay our lives down to share that good news with others. It has been one of the spurs to missions movements in the past. It has been something that lifted believers out of apathy. It has been one of the reasons people have been called to speak to their neighbors and friends and lead them to Christ. It has created a passion in the church, not just the existence of hell, but the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And here's a question: if this exists, how then shall I live? If we don't accept the reality of hell, we'll never appreciate the glory of the gospel. The price that Jesus paid and the cost that he paid and the greatness of the message, the gospel of Jesus Christ and the grace that he provided, in contrast to the reality of living apart from God, really clarifies for me the urgency of this life and also the goodness of God in providing a way that I could come to him. I love this quote by John Wesley. The next slide. Give me 100 preachers who fear nothing but sin and desire nothing but God, and I care not whether they be clergymen or laymen. They alone will shake the gates of hell and set up a kingdom of heaven on earth. I love this quote. It's what he's saying is, give me believers who hate sin and love God and will do anything to share the message of God's love. And there's probably people here today and you're thinking, well, in reality of this, my life, what is God asking me to do? As often, it was a message like this, where as a 15-year-old boy, I kneeled down and I said, God, help me make a difference in this world. Help me to be someone who stands between people and hell and invites them to know Jesus Christ. And I remember as I prayed, and this was a reality that night. I got what was called my call, my purpose to share this message with people. I felt this enormous weight on my shoulder, and I said, God, why is this weight? And he said, this is the cross I'm giving you. When we planted this church, my wife and I, we went through a year of incredible challenge and a lot of self-doubt and things. but we knew God was going to bring it about because we wanted this to be a place where people who are going through life and struggling and trying to figure things out would find out about a loving God who loves them, who could save them not only in the next world, but this world as well. And maybe there's people here today, and maybe you're going, I want to be this, I want to be that, or I'm going to give my life to this, or I'm going to give my life to that. And maybe today's the day where you go, maybe God is calling me, maybe God is speaking to me about doing some things to help bring people to faith in Jesus Christ. Maybe it means I become a baseball coach at a local team and care about those young guys or girls who are playing and show them Jesus through my actions and words. Maybe somebody here is, you're going through school and you don't know whether you want to be this or that and all that, and God's saying, I'm picking you. I'd like you to take some Bible courses, go to seminary, go to college, become a follower of Christ and become a missionary, evangelist, pastor, church worker, something. Maybe God's calling you to that, and today is your day. Whatever it is, if hell exists, it helps my understanding that the gospel is absolutely amazing, and if I have one life to live and I will stand before God someday, and His grace, He has chosen to save me, and I've accepted that gift, keeping it to myself would be an incredibly selfish thing to do. Maybe God is talking to you today about taking a major step in your life, a realignment, where you go, maybe the biggest deal to me this week is not going to be getting another sale or making sure I got enough groceries or making sure my garage door is fixed or whatever. These are all parts of life. But maybe my highest calling today is going to be reach across the fence to my neighbor, have them over for a barbecue, get to know them. And after you deepen that relationship with them, talk about your faith in God and tell your story. Maybe it's going to be that today. Maybe today will be the day where you go, you know what, I've been living this part of my life in a complete compromise. And I've just got this dark part of my life that's never dealt with. And that part of my life is causing me hell. God never meant for me to do this. And this, where lies I tell myself, I've always done it, always going to do it, always be a part of me, it's okay, I justify it, I cover it, I make others, appeal for it, and maybe today's the day where you go, I will not allow hell to ruin this one life I have. I'm going to find a way. I'm going to go to counseling. I'm going to get help. I'm going to drag this ugly thing into the light and allow God's love to shrivel it up. Maybe it's alcoholism, maybe you're closet drunk. Maybe it's maybe there's a deep, dark secret that you've been hiding. Maybe you're a bully. Maybe you control the people around you by manipulating them and talking them down and arguing them. Maybe you prey on kids. Maybe you just are arrogant. Whatever it is, these are the things of hell. They shall someday be banished from the presence of God. And if you haven't made a commitment to Christ, or if you have, you don't have to let those things rule you anymore. Jesus is willing to give you the gift of His salvation and to give you strength and give you the ability to overcome these things in His power. We had a guy pass away last year named Bill Graham. How many people remember Bill? Does anybody remember Bill? He's about the sweetest guy. Bill, on a Saturday night many years ago, was an alcoholic sitting in front of his TV, and he thought, this can't go on. I've got to do something with my life. He was sitting there. He was, in his 60s or late 50s. It looked like he was 70. Just alcohol that completely wrecked his life. And he called a guy who seemed to have it together a bit. And that was a guy that went to this church but hadn't made a commitment to Christ. And so he called him and he said, horrible, my life is in ruins. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do. And the guy said, his name's Curtis, he said, why don't you try church? Bill said, church? Why would that help? The guy said, I've been part of this church. It's really helping everything I'm doing, and why don't you try it? So Bill came that next day, and within a few services, he gave his heart to Christ. He completely kicked alcohol. He booted it. He started to live for God. And I remember every Sunday morning, Tony would come in and go, "Good morning." You know who would shout out "Good morning"? Bill. "Good morning!" It's just, he was probably one of the sweetest people I've ever known. Hell had no hold over him anymore. And it doesn't have to have a hold over you. Jesus said to his followers, "Upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against us. As I have said to you, and will repeat until the day I die, you are the dangerous ones. You have Jesus in you. And hell hath no fury that you can't overcome in the love of Jesus." That's all I got to say about that. Okay? Does that make sense? So a hard message, but I want to give a chance for questions. I know we're getting late, but I want to give a quick chance for questions. So first, we're going to do the baskets. Pass the baskets around. Outies come out first. The ones you take stuff out of, innies are the ones you put stuff in. While we're doing that, I've got some quotes to come up, and then we'll take a couple minutes for questions before we close in a couple songs. But I want to give everybody a chance to ask some questions and things afterwards. So God bless you as you do that. I'll be up again in a minute. Nancy Holmes, you won the coffee card. Hey, way to go, girl. So you come claim that afterwards. Got time for a couple questions? Yes, Jeremy. Seriously, you got a question?
Yeah.
Really, about hell?
It's strange.
Okay, just a sec. You're gonna, Mike, you got to talk into the mic. So.
There's a guy on YouTube. He's preaching a lot about how to, like basically the gospel.
Yeah.
And some of it did deal with heaven and hell.
Yeah.
But he was condemning one of the Christian artists, Kirk Franklin.
Yeah.
And what he seems to think that Kirk Franklin is giving a message that's not of the gospel.
Yeah.
Because they had all these people that were dressed, like women were dressed in
Yeah.
garments that were probably not
Okay.
of
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
And he's kind of condemning people in the streets
Yeah.
and saying Kirk Franklin is not doing a good justice of Christian love
Yeah.
in his music.
Yeah.
How do you explain somebody who does that,
Yeah.
in a sense, like maybe they're kind of
Yeah.
not being real themselves?
Yeah. Can I talk a little bit to that? Because I grew up in exposed to a few people like this. If someone enjoys talking about hell, there's something seriously wrong with them. Okay? And then when someone takes another brother in Christ and goes, "This is my theological box," if they don't fit in it, they're going there and all that kind of stuff. It is simplistic, simple-minded. I'm all for theological purity. I really am. I love theology. I consider it the queen of sciences. And there are hills I will die on. Okay? The biggest being Jesus. Okay? But here's the reality is if he's wasting his air spending all this time tearing down another Christian brother when there are literally hundreds of millions of people in this world that face the reality of a Christless eternity, then he's just being mean. And I'll tell you something, because you're going to run into religious people like this who seem to get this little buzz out of being right and other people wrong. And maybe you're one of these people. Look for meanness. When meanness comes out, that's not God. Okay? A brother that corrects another brother, and we should challenge and keep each other accountable. A brother who corrects another brother, a sister who corrects another sister, should sit down in fear and trembling, should absolutely love the person you're interacting with, and be open and to criticism of your own, and be asking the question, am I the one who should be sitting down with this person? And another level of that, Jeremy, that you will see in people are people who talk about other people behind their back. If someone says, "Well, you're not going to believe this, Paul's doing this, and all this," and tells everybody else and doesn't tell Paul himself, that is gossip. That is sinful. That is horrible. And it is dehumanizing. Look for these things. When you see them, it's not God that's causing that. It's the devil getting a foothold. It really is. And, I can't say it simpler than that. Like, I just tend to, if I look at something, and there was a day and age where kind of the louder or more angry the preacher sounded, the more we thought they were anointed. Like, "Wow, he's a good preacher, man. It makes me feel like I'm, horrible," and all that kind of stuff. I remember a lady coming to our church one time, and she came up afterwards and she said, "Thank you. I said, how come? She says, it's the first time I've been to church in 30 years and haven't felt beat up. Oh my gosh. My goal for you is to leave here with your feet off the ground and absolutely inspired, even when I challenge you. Yeah. No, I'm sorry, it gets me angry, because people beat up on people that are susceptible to that. It's just dumb. Yeah, sorry.
Appreciate you sharing, I guess, the name of the group, this person's ministry is on Teen Crew.
Yeah,
So if you ever look it up, that's,
yeah.
I don't know if he's really giving a good service for Christians.
Well, you don't know. Like I said, that kind of stuff, maybe I'm getting old, but I kind of go, life is short. I'm looking for can-do people that hate sin, love God, and are positive. Yeah, they're reflecting Jesus. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Yes, Jane. Hi, Jane. How's it going?
Good.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to clarify my thoughts because this
Yeah.
topic is so deep. I
know it is.
I'm more
Yeah.
confused now than I ever was, Scott. Sorry.
Yeah.
Christianity, Catholicism
Yeah.
is based on fear, right?
Yes, yeah.
My whole generation.
In some aspects.
In
Yeah,
some
yeah, yeah,
aspects.
yeah.
The individuals I've grown up with have this fear of
Yeah.
if you don't go to heaven, you go to hell.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And when you said that God never drives anyone
Yes.
to come to him,
Yeah.
by the invention of the
Mhm.
mention
Yes.
of hell,
Yeah.
this is more of a comment,
Yeah.
is he not already
Hmm.
pushing that in these people?
Yeah, is he manipulating
to
them,
that,
serve me
rather-
or else kind of
yeah,
thing? Yes.
maybe not
Yeah.
overtly saying that, but,
Yes. Yes.
it's just something that keeps popping up in my head.
Yeah. There's a scripture in Romans 2 that I really love, where it talks about someday we'll stand before God and the secrets of men's hearts will be exposed, right? The one interesting thing in the account I was reading is we don't know why Lazarus was on Abraham's side. Was it just because he was poor? There had to be more to it than that, because scripture teaches that, okay? And there will come a day, and we like to divvy people out. We enjoy doing that. This person's not going to make it, this person's going to, all those kind of things. And it sounds manipulative, but it's not. Actually, it's a reality, okay? So when my kids are growing up and they want to go play in traffic, and I tell them, you don't want to play in traffic because cars are made of metal and you're mostly water. And so if you play in traffic and you hit one of these cars, or one of them, heaven forbid, hits you, the outcome is not going to go well for you, right? Okay? And so what I'm doing is I'm steering and all those kind of things. Hell, for some people, isn't a deterrent. It's actually a motivator. Some people shake their fist at God. Joseph Stalin died on his back. He was actually a trained clergyman before he became a horrible dictator, and died shaking his fist at the air. Some people will choose that. There's people in the church traditionally, and this is something the church has to, I'm not talking about ex cathedra, I'm not just talking about Catholics, Protestants, all that kind of, need to come clean on and say, are we browbeating people using fear to get them into heaven? Or is our message good news? Because that's what gospel meant, okay? Are we liberating people, or are we putting a new bondage on them? And there's this fine line, because the Bible doesn't teach us to fear hell. It doesn't. You know what it says? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When I realize he's God, he's not just applying for the position, it doesn't mean I'm scared of God. It's that I respect him so highly that I defer to him. And I live to please him. I live to focus on him. I trust him. Okay? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is those somber moments when we realize that God is great and is incredible. There's only been one time in my life I've ever prayed for a person that's been sick that got healed. It was a little baby. We were in sick kids hospital. And I've spent a lot of time with sick kids, praying for children and praying for things. And some people here, your children have been in there, and, horrible things have happened. It's one of the most beautiful hospitals I've ever been in, because the spirit there is just wonderful. Like, I had nurses, oh, you're a minister, come on, okay, this is what's going on, you need to pray for this. And I've never experienced that in very few hospitals. But this little guy was dying. His body was so racked with, his lungs were full of all kinds of things, and there were complications in his birth. And every time they changed his diaper, they were taking his life in their hands. That's how close to death he was. And this is a little life. And I remember I put my hand beside him, and I prayed for him. And I had this feeling. It was this overwhelming wave. I felt how God loved that child. And I turned to the parents. I'd never do this, but I did it. I said, he's going to be okay. And he was out in 2 days. And I've prayed for many babies in that situation that weren't okay. You know? But my takeout from that wasn't, wow, God's amazing, he healed. I thought that was amazing. My takeout from that is it took me 3 weeks before I felt normal again. Because that overwhelming love of God wrecked me. It wrecked me in that I realized that, you know, we're very easy to look at people and say, God does this or God does that, you know, and I couldn't believe it. And it wrecked me. That's a God I fear. I fear because when I look at reality and I look at the reality of who he is, I don't have to worry about what you think or what you think or what this world thinks or my bank balance and all that. If God is God, he's not just applying for the position, then my greatest respect and awe is reserved for him. So churches in the past have been traditionally guilty of using hell as a linchpin to get people, particularly children, into heaven. And that's not what Jesus did. It isn't. They talked about good news. The disciples, they talked about good news. They talked about this message. And though they spoke about the reality of hell, they always spoke about it in the context of, we don't need this. This you can put behind you. Jesus is a way. God made a way for you to come to him. And that is good news. And people received it with joy. And you can as well. Just don't keep it to yourself. Yeah, Michael.
You touched on it a bit at the end there, but I was going to say it's very rare that Jesus mentions hell in the context of fear.
Yes.
He, in the Old Testament and New Testament,
Yes.
the Bible tends to bring up hell as a reassurance to the believers that there's something for everyone else.
Yeah.
Don't judge, it's mine to judge, God says.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it, I'll deal with the chaff later, he says.
Yeah.
You know, don't worry, those people are going somewhere else, Jesus says.
Yeah.
It's the sense that Jesus is reminding us not to do the judging.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just believe and serve me and you'll be fine.
Yeah.
We've got something else planned for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not you better serve me or you're going to hell.
No.
It's don't worry about it.
God will
There's something
take
for those
care of it.
people.
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
already rejected me. Don't worry about them.
Yeah, yeah. And you're absolutely right. If you read the book of Revelation, I'll tell you, it's a trip. I mean, it is a trip, the book of Revelation. I read it many, many times. And one of the things that, you know, in understanding the book of Revelation, because it talks a lot about these things, good and bad, was my understanding that John was writing from the Isle of Patmos to the church in that time. They had just recently gone through an experience with an emperor named Nero. Nero is kind of like the Hitler of the Roman world. He was a man that burned down half of Rome and then blamed the Christians for it. And so everywhere, the churches John was writing to and the people he wrote that book to initially, they had watched their children, their wives, their husbands. There wasn't a person in the Church of Jesus Christ who hadn't lost multiple people to torturous, horrible deaths. They understood what hell was. And John, writing to them, said, in the end, God wins. There will be justice. God hasn't forgotten you. The hell you're experiencing in this world is just temporary. There is hope. There's going to be a new earth and a new Jerusalem, and death will be thrown into the lake of fire. And believe me, it brought nothing but joy and relief to them. We tend to read it and think, oh, it's so scary and all those kinds of things. That was the world they were living in. And for most people of history, it's been the world they live in. Anyways, I rambled a lot today. You guys have been wonderful. Next week, I talk about heaven. Yay! Yay, yeah. And if you think it's like, you know, floating on clouds playing harps, No, that's hell. This is much better. This is much better. And the little we know about it is amazing. And that my lovely wife has prepared 2 great songs. So I'll ask you to stand. We're going to sing through them, and then we'll let you go. Thanks for staying late today. It was a good one, eh? Yeah. Some of you will, I'm going to put this online, will feel tempted to put it online and then call your ex-wife and tell them they need to hear this message because that's where they're going. This is a message to encourage Christians to be diligent and for us to look at this world and realize it needs saving. Okay? And that's my heart in this, and completely my heart in this. And so if you've got somebody that's off the beaten path and you want to use this message to 2x4 them up the side of the head, I just ask you prayerfully consider that this is a message so that you and I can go, we serve a great God, and his overcoming of evil and hell and all those things is a gracious, great gift, and that we look at him in awe and reverence and live our lives to him, and we have hope. Okay? So I hope you do that. I know lots of you have questions. You want to email them this week. Like I said, I'll try to retain my brain, the stuff I've studied and things like that. It's a lot of complicated questions, and I could do a whole series on this. But I thought a whole series would probably be a little much. I appreciate your bravery in showing up today. We're going to be here in the next 2 weeks in the lobby. And so make sure you come back here next Sunday as we talk about heaven. All right? God bless you. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next week.